most people that do watch my channel, of course, are newcomers or aspiring newcomers to Canada, but I do have also Canadians who are interested in the immigration system, and maybe Canadians who have married a foreign spouse and they need to navigate certain, work permit applications or a PR application for family sponsorship. So interestingly, I spend most of my day communicating with immigrants and those who do not have the right to vote. But I have been actively volunteering and canvassing in the riding of University of Rosedale, which is Chrystia Freeland's riding. It's like an electoral district. And I've been volunteering with the Conservative Party, obviously, and I'm happy to be a partisan in saying that, yes, I support the Conservative Party of Canada and why I'm voting for them. And I'm just going to give you 3 reasons, some of the biggest screw-ups of the Liberal Party over their immigration, on their immigration side, their immigration portfolio. I'm going to highlight that so that you can understand where the frustrations are coming from as a professional working in this space and saying, whoa, this is where they've screwed up. They're screwing up really bad, and there's no hope that they're going to fix it. Okay? In fact, they're going to make it even worse than it already is, and it's terrible. This is someone who I value high-skilled immigration to Canada. I believe that was and can be Canada's superpower. If we're able to bring the best and the brightest business owners, entrepreneurs, highly skilled workers, and that are naturally more skilled than Canadians, they will increase our standard of living, increase our productivity, right? Because we would be adding permanent residents and Canadian citizens that are earning more highly skilled, have the ability to train and pass those skills on to Canadians and PRs. And what the Liberal government has really done is flooded our country with unskilled, low-skilled, low-wage, temporary foreign workers. And that's not good. But let's actually look into it, because, I like to do screen shares on my channel and show you, yes, the proof is in the pudding. The proof is in the track record. We can show how they've screwed this up. Now, they have brought back some of the low-wage LMIAs and a lot of restrictions on them because of advocacy from people like myself, talking about the immigration fraud, having my posts go viral on X, speaking with, national media like CBC, Bloomberg, Financial Post, I should say, the Globe and Mail, about this immigration fraud that was happening, whereby people were basically selling job offers because those job offers would help them to facilitate a transition to PR. You were putting the power in the hands of small employers, unscrupulous employers that were then charging, $50,000 for a non-bona fide job offer so that the people could qualify, that person could qualify for permanent residence, which is disgusting. And it's fraudulent and it's wrong, but it was happening at scale and in a massive way. And I was very outspoken against that, and I'm happy that they did remove the points. But again, like, they've taken, a battering ram to the system, and now it needs to be rebuilt onto a solid foundation. But the system is so unstable right now. It's oscillating and it's out of control. And they've played around with way too many variables and haven't had time to measure and react and see. So just some key examples of where they've kind of done this. Let's look at the public policies, okay? So the longest standing immigration minister in Canada's history was Jason Kenney from 2008 till 2013. He served a 5-year term. He was a Conservative. He was the one that basically built out and developed the express entry system, which is smart because express entry is where 70% of our immigrants come through, economic class immigrants, I should say, like more than 50%, 70 roughly, and they're destined for settling outside of Quebec. But they brought in a system of ministerial instructions, which instead of people just applying for permanent residence, like nobody can just apply. You can't apply. The only way you can really apply is if you have that invitation. So you first need to qualify. You need to meet a threshold, right? And if you're above that threshold, then you get invited to apply for PR, and then you've got to pass the criminal, the security, and prove that you were eligible to be above that threshold. Now, the Liberals have completely screwed up that threshold, and I'll show you that later on in the rant. But let's just look at the public policies. In Jason Kenney's time, okay, there was one public policy that he enacted, and public policies are like executive orders, right? He did one public policy. Since the Liberal government, I mean, it really took off. They did about 10 public policies from 2015 till 2019, which is still 2 per year. They're like executive orders. They don't require confidence of the House. They're just, the minister feels it's importance. It's like an emergency measure that they need to, bring in fast. The problem with public policies is it's hard for officers to keep up with all the public policies, number one. So it increases the propensity for mistakes to be made. 2, it also, applicants make mistakes because, a public policy was introduced that they could work full-time on study permits, then it was revoked, then it was, okay, we're going to make it just during this period, or they had to have applied for their study permit at this time, and if they're off campus or on campus, and where they're working, like all these things come into play, and it increases the incidence of people getting just caught up in bureaucratic and procedural hurdles, and falling out of compliance because the Liberal government keeps moving the goalposts so fast at a point that people can't plan their lives around. That is a big issue. With immigration, sometimes people work in an occupation for 2 to 3 years to qualify for an invitation. And when you're changing and adding public policies at a rate of like 1 or 2 per month, as they started doing through COVID, then people aren't able to plan their lives. And if they're not able to plan their lives, and then immigration becomes unpredictable, loaded with backlogs and extended processing times, even though they've increased the amount of staff at IRCC like 40% since 2020. Yet we're still dealing with insane backlogs and 200 days to for in Canada work permit applications. It's ridiculous, and extensions. So all these things have kind of been problematic with the current government. And the public policies is one. You can just see how ridiculous these public policies are. And one that's exceptionally, these are all public policies. They brought them in too while the government was prorogued, right? There's still, and they actually brought in a public policy, and you see, for certain out of status or unauthorized home care workers in Canada. What's really frustrating is the Liberals have brought in programs that are favorable towards people who are out of status. So that means people who have stayed beyond their authorized stay in Canada, and they haven't reapplied to restore their status. They've not done anything besides work for cash under the table, work illegally, remain here illegally. They haven't returned home. That is what it means when you're out of status. It means you are illegal in Canada. You were supposed to have left on a certain date. Now they brought in pathways that facilitated permanent residence for construction workers who were unauthorized and working. But if somebody's authorized and working, they didn't qualify. Tell me how that makes sense. We're encouraging and rewarding people with permanent residence who have violated the conditions, violated the Immigration Refugee Protection Act and the regulations, and they've worked illegally, haven't paid taxes, and they're just getting cash under the table, and they're getting a path. Whereas the people who have gone through the proper channels, done everything right, they're not. They're struggling to transition to PR. And then that's what I'm going to show you in the second part of this video. So the public policies, this is enough to not vote them in for a second term or fourth term. And a guy like Mark Miller, who thankfully he was fired from his position, but the new one, Rachel, she's not any better. And I'm going to show you where she's now screwed up. So like I said, Jason Kenney brought in the system of ministerial instruction, which is, it really helped to allow PRs to process in 6 months or less, because before the processing was like 2 or 3 years. A lot of people were applying, but a lot of people weren't qualifying. So the officers had to basically filter through a lot of chaff, let's say. Now, with the ministerial instructions, it said we're going to set a threshold, and the threshold is going to be based upon factors like English, family in Canada, Canadian experience, foreign work experience, and other factors such as if they studied in Canada, the level of education that they have, right? And that was the CRS, the Comprehensive Ranking System, the points system. That was the envy of the world. And all they had to do was really nothing, and it wouldn't have created problems. I mean, they did bring in a ton of low-skilled and, I would say, non-genuine students as temporary residents, and then the LMIA fraud got out of hand. So they kind of screwed up by not capping the temporary residents, which then a lot of temporary residents aim to transition to permanent residence. But when those spots, they did increase them, but there's still a finite number, then like 90% of people are going home, right? And the key is to be able to get the top 10% of economic class migrants. So yeah, because they let in so many temporary residents, 90% are going to be going home. But they should be selecting the top 10%. And right now they're not. They're actually selecting, in many ways I'll show you, the bottom like 1% and bottom 5%, because they are screwing with that threshold, the CRS score, and what they're inviting on certain draws. So if I were to show you, you can see these are all the history of express entry draws. And in 2015, 2016, the average score of no program specified, I don't want to go into too much detail, but this is basically Canadian Experience Class, Federal Skilled Trades Program, and the Federal Skilled Worker Program. And yeah, okay, 480 was a competitive score in the past, but there was a consistency, 473, so it went down a little bit. Maybe the demand to immigrating to Canada reduced a little bit, but they were doing a very good job managing the numbers and keeping what the Conservatives had set up. When COVID happened, everything went out the door. Even prior to COVID, you can see that they were doing April 3rd, April 17th, May 1st, May 15th, May 29th. There's a cadence. There's a predictable cadence. A draws every 2 weeks. Why is that important? Because I've mentioned the system is based on ministerial instructions. Applicants who are looking to obtain PR need to know, are they going to qualify if they're sitting at 460 in the pool? And at that time on May 29th, they could have said, yes, I will, because I'm 460. I wouldn't have got invited in May. I wouldn't have been invited in June, but I would have got invited in July, and then I would have got invited later in July. And then they can tweak and increase their points by doing better on English or French exam. But there was predictability, there was cadence, and a 450, 460, 470 is a pretty qualified applicant. That could be somebody who's, in their late 30s, but they have a master's degree and they have a year of skilled work experience in Canada and a bunch of foreign skilled work experience. Though that person would be around 470 and speaking a CLB9 English. It could be someone who studied and did a bachelor degree, and then they have 2 years of work experience as an engineer. They would have qualified back then. So there was a very predictable system. Then they totally botched it. Okay, I'm going to show you what they've done even this year with the new with the new Rachel. Immigration minister after Mark was fired. So they brought in a category-specific draws, which were in an attempt to target in-demand occupations, which I agree with the premise of it, but I think it should all be in one large express entry system, and the points should be a bit more granular. Like express entries out of 600, it needs to be out of like 2,000. And we need to be taking into account earnings, residence time in Canada, and other factors. There's many more variables that we should be able to play with. So for the Canadian experience class, they did a couple draws this year. They did 3, and then they just stopped, and they were highly inflated. So this was 542. Like, we were seeing that the average in 2019 was 450, 460, 470. It's like, why is it so high, right? And the reason it was so high is because something like 40% of people in the pool had fake arranged employment. Now, not all of it was fake, but by some Service Canada officers' admissions, maybe 50 to 75% of those LMIAs were fake. What that means is someone would get 50 points extra than someone who was competitive with like a 470. They would be then 520 with 50 points of arranged employment. And a lot of those were facilitated by the buying and selling of LMIAs. So somebody is a food service supervisor, and the guy at Wendy's or Tim Hortons, who's ever managing it, sells it for $50,000, says, okay, I'll give you a job offer. And they get 50 points, and then they're above 520, and they get in on the Canadian experience class. Now, the Liberals did finally listen after 2 years of basically me advocating and other consultants and people saying you need to remove the immigration incentive for an LMIA. And they did, which is hopefully why we're going to see a reduction maybe in the threshold, at least by 50, of all that fake arranged employment going down. But what they decided to also do, which is insane to me, is they brought in category-specific draws, like healthcare, okay, trades, trade occupations, but they also added French proficiency to it. And the last category draws, all 5 of them have been French, 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 since basically December. What this means is you can see with the French language proficiency, the points are going down to like 428, 410, and the last one was 379. Like, it's actually getting worse. It's getting less competitive for people that meet the specific requirements of French language proficiency, which I'm going to show you. Let's have a look at, I calculated the score. This is somebody who's 408, and which means they would have been invited on the French draws. All they had to do was speak English and French, one off from perfect, have a 2-year diploma in VCR repair from the 70s, be above the age of 45, have no spouse, have no work experience in Canada, have never been to Canada, but because they speak French, they get the extra 75 points. They could be 80 years old, and they're qualifying for PR. They're at 408, and there's a lot of leeway there. Like, maybe somebody with a high school education, and that's 70 years old, but they have 3 years of skilled work experience, which could be at like a cafe. Like, legit, it could be food service supervisor, it could be line cook. They're getting invited they're getting a permanent residence visa while they are overseas, because they don't need to have Canadian experience for the French language draws. It's outrageous that all they need is $15,000 in settlement funds because they're one person. They're going to blow through that. They're not going to find a job because they don't have the skills that employers need. And they're coming from possibly, a place like North Africa or from France, where English and French are pretty much widely spoken, or they're just someone who studied English and French. Now, this is again, they're taking spots away in our premier economic immigration program, which is supposed to attract the best and the brightest. And like I said, they've invited about 25,000 people, so probably about 20% of our economic immigration quota under French. Carney says he wants to increase it 12%. Keep in mind, this program, our flagship economic immigration, does not allow you to immigrate to Quebec on it. So this is for French speakers. Like, French speakers are going to be settling in English Canada that have never been to Canada, that only have settlement funds, have no job. Whereas I had a consultation with a gentleman from Indonesia, which I remember because I don't meet a lot of Indonesian immigrants compared to like this, the country. They have a massive population, but we don't have a huge Indonesian community in Canada, not compared to like our Filipino community, Indian, Chinese community, right? Indonesia is a very populous country. So I thought, well, it's neat that I'm meeting someone from Indonesia. He was a graduate of a top tier school. I'm talking top 5 university. He studied his bachelor degree. He came here when he was like 18, studied a bachelor degree for 4 years, has been working for the past 3 years on his post-graduation work permit as, I'm going to say, a financial analyst, making somewhere between 90 to 110 a year, paying a lot in taxes. His score is like 505, right? But he didn't qualify for any of the French, obviously, because he doesn't speak French. But obviously his employer in Toronto, a large bank, doesn't feel that it's necessary for him to speak French because that's not what employers are requiring. We're not asking a nurse to speak French in living in Saskatchewan. We do not need a tradesperson to be speaking French living in London, Ontario. So this is the frustrating thing, that someone who has literally grown up in Canada their adult life, has studied at a fantastic university, world renowned, is working in a job that is more than the average Canadian earns, which tells me that he's a more productive person than the average Canadian, which are the people we should be transitioning to PR, especially for an economic immigration program, which is people who can become economically established, which means they can have a job and they're not going to be dependent on welfare and whatnot. Whereas the guy from the 70-year-old with the diploma in VCR repair, I'm sure, because he speaks English and French, he's a lot more qualified than this Indonesian guy who is in his 20s, okay, and would start a family here if he could achieve permanent residence, would continue working and probably move up the company and increase our productivity as a country and overall benefit Canada. And I'm not saying that everyone who was invited in French is, not qualified. It's just the proof is in the points. You can see it. We haven't seen a cutoff like 379 even since the inception of express entry, besides the Liberals' crazy COVID thing with Sean Fraser when he invited people with just a pulse who are working in Canada to the tune of like 30,000 invitations. So this is my issue. We've had a big departure from merit, and I feel sick for those people. Like, he has spent probably almost $200,000 in international tuition fees for this top tier university that it's tough to get in, and they have a genuine admissions process rather than these diploma mills that just don't give a shit who they admit, but they want to take their money. And he was working in a very good job, but there was no path for him to transition to PR because they've screwed up that bad that they don't care about merit anymore. And he's just one example. If he had started a company and created 100 jobs, his points would actually be less because he wouldn't be able to claim any Canadian work experience, which is ridiculous. Like, if someone like Elon Musk, well, he's Canadian, so somebody, a brilliant, let's say, entrepreneur and business owner, they bring 100 jobs to Canada, they don't have a pathway because they can't claim work experience because it's self-employed. And there's no other pathway or program besides the startup visa program, which has been totally botched by the Liberals, and now is probably the next target for me complaining about fraud would be these organizations that are charging $400,000 for teams of 5, these fake angel investors and these fake incubators. So. And by capping that, that's what the Liberals facilitated and created. But that program needs an overhaul as well. So I hope that can provide you with some context on why people say, why are you so against the Liberals well, we can talk about crime policy and economic policy and this and that and pretty much everything else they've screwed up. And then Carney comes out, reads the room, and says, we're going to increase Francophone immigration 12%? Are you kidding? That's not what hospitals are asking for. That's not what our tradespeople are requesting. You know, it will not, it will make it worse, and it will make it harder. And it's damaging to Canada's reputation now when that Indonesian student goes home, because he's not going to go out of status, because he's an honest, law-abiding person. And yes, he's not going to go out of status, so he's not going to qualify for the out-of-status construction worker program or the out-of-status home support worker program, which are, those are laborers and caregivers, both unskilled occupations. And he was in a professional tier 1 occupation, and yet he's going to go home, and we're going to be saying goodbye to those people. And that's going to further, I'd say, wreck Canada's reputation on an international stage. Because can you imagine, he goes back, he says, yes, I spent, $200,000. I had a great job in Canada. I was getting paid $100K a year. But if I could do it all over again, I wouldn't. I spent 7 years of my life in a country that I cannot become a permanent resident of. And there's people becoming permanent residents that have never spent a day in Canada, worked in Canada, spent any money, paid taxes in Canada. Because of, I don't know, some kind of political, whatever reason they're doing the French proficiency in our economic flagship program, I fail to really understand it. Besides them just intentionally trying to create social and civil unrest and just destroy our broad acceptance as a country of a merit-based immigration system. They're destroying what the Conservatives worked so hard to build and develop. So you want to know why I'm volunteering and I'm canvassing so hard? That's why. This is why. I showed you the proof is there. And this is just scratching the surface. If we were to look at the international student population and how many, how long until they figured out, 99% of the people in this program are international students. Clearly, they're not selling education, they're selling immigration. Okay? If Canadian and PRs don't see value in the education, they're not enrolled. If there's an immigration benefit, clearly that's why there's a high proportion of international students in this program. So I'm not necessarily a big fan of arbitrary caps, but I'm a fan of proportion, okay, and percentages, okay. Maybe once a school gets above 30% international, it's well, they're trying to sell something. And how do we know that their acceptance standards are rigorous, like the University of Waterloo or University of Toronto? How can we differentiate between those two? But they've totally screwed up that. I could go on and on and on and on. So now I'm canvassing in the riding of University of Rosedale, which is Chrystia Freeland's riding. And I have to say, I'm confident that the Conservatives are going to pull off a win this election. And I'll be happy to announce to the channel after the 28th what I think, how immigration is going to develop from them, because they didn't really put a lot in their platform with the Conservatives. But I can imagine what they're going to do is drastically try and simplify it. And they're not going to be doing the public policy stuff the way it's using executive orders. I think they're going to, they should remove the French category. They should relegate the Francophone mobility program or these pilots to encouraging the flourishing of Francophone communities, small communities outside of Quebec. But that should be like a niche or a pilot. It should not be thrown in with nurses and doctors, engineers, and tradespeople, right? Red Seal tradespeople. Someone with a red seal still wouldn't qualify necessarily. Somebody with a red seal with 1 year of Canadian work experience and mediocre English would have been sidelined. Someone who's working as an electrician or a plumber or as any other Red Seal trade, concrete finisher. These guys, or these women, these people, are literally, their spots are being given up to someone who's never been to Canada, and just on the basis of them speaking English and French, which I find abhorrent. And we can go in about all the other things that they screwed up, but I'm just going to keep it to this for now. So if you haven't voted yet, please go out and vote on the 28th. And if you want more reasons that the Conservative Party actually is the better party right now to lead Canada through this crisis, and will do a much better job on immigration, because, I mean, anyone would do a better job than the Liberals right now. They've destroyed it. They've destroyed it. I don't know. They've just completely destroyed it. There's very little merit left. There's a lack of predictability for applicants, bona fide applicants. They're saying one thing and doing another thing. So I just wanted to get that out and give you guys an update. I'm in Toronto now, and you'll notice my calendar has been blocked. It's election week, and I've been really busy canvassing, because I believe that this is what Canada needs. We need a change, and we need to bring back what was the envy of the world, the best immigration system and programs, and bring in technology, decrease processing times, obviously, and make it simpler for applicants and make it predictable for them. These are people's lives. Like, yes, they're not Canadians or PRs. They don't have full permanent status in this country yet, but they are human beings, and they deserve to be treated like human beings. And this government has continued to move the goalposts with such a lack of regard for their family, their life. They are under so much stress and uncertainty when you keep changing what in a shorter time frame than they need to qualify for certain programs. And it's just not right. It's bad for Canada's reputation. It's bad we're not attracting entrepreneurs. We're not attracting the best and the brightest. We're having entrepreneurs go to the United States on O1 visas. We're having the best, developers and software engineers going to San Francisco, because the wages here do not compete, because we don't have a friendly business climate that facilitates and fosters innovation and the creation of companies here, and the maintenance of companies and growth of companies in Canada. So there's a lot of issues, but we can start by just returning the immigration system, setting targets, being accountable, transparent, and enabling communication and reasonable forms of communication, not via fax and printed documents. I mean, we're pretty much fully online now, but it's a lot of the technology is probably 20 or 25 years old, and it hasn't been updated, and it facilitates and creates mistakes and errors by applicants. And it's almost like it's designed that way. It's almost like they designed it to be so procedural and so bureaucratic that instead of having to actually put in the work to develop and build a system and measure that system, that we're capturing the top 10% and the top 25% of temporary residents, or whatever it needs to be to meet that number, that target, that goal, and to keep up with housing and job growth and all that. If we want to get there, it seems like they'd rather be lazy and say, we're going to make it so complex, so convoluted, we're going to eliminate all methods for them to communicate with the officers. We're going to have a bunch of technical problems and issues and keep the technology old and asking broken sentence English. We're going to be asking, questions that are incomplete sentences to people whose English and French may not be their first language, to make it very confusing to fill out. And we're going to have contradicting information on our website in 3 different areas. and they're going to make mistakes, and then they're going to get banned from Canada, and they're going to get deported, and these people are going to, through making honest errors and omissions, because the system is designed for that, we're going to ask them to disclose all previous refusals, and we're going to give them 200 characters, less than a tweet to explain maybe a complex history of refusals. And if they think, well, I'm given this much information in the form, am I supposed to like condense it to fit in those 200 characters? And when you do read through the instruction guide and you find if there's any, attach another sheet, okay, fine. But you have a hard time attaching a sheet because you've got to use a validated smart form. So it doesn't actually go in the right upload header. Like, I know I'm rambling a little bit about all the technology shortcomings at IRCC, but they were supposed to have this client experience platform developed like 2-3 years ago. And it's like they've completely abandoned it. So what that ends up doing is if they're too lazy, if the politicians are too lazy, which is why I love the fact that Pierre said we're working through the summer if we have to. Damn right you are, because you work for us, the Canadian people. The government is meant to serve us, okay, and create the conditions in which business and people can flourish. And if they're able to design the system so that they can capture the top 10%, great. What they've been doing is they've just been throwing in like a wrench in the wheel and just making it complex and convoluted so that people then lose out not because of merit, not because they're the top, not in the top 10%, but because of timing issues, because they decided to not do a Canadian experience class draws in the last 2 months, but they decided to do 3 at the beginning of the year. So people who had a work permit expiring at the beginning of the year are better off than someone who had a work permit expiring later on, which is completely arbitrary, right? So timing issues, errors in the forms, contradicting information on the website, all these to try and, thin the herd or cut it down. It then makes it more of a lottery and far less of a merit-based process, which I have a serious issue with. So thank you for tuning in. I look forward to continuing to produce content from my new studio in Toronto with my fish land high, beta fish behind me, and got some shrimps in the tank. And I look forward to decorating my office and continuing to show you guys pathways and give my comments on the upcoming, once there is a new party in, where I think the immigration is going to be going, and continue to keep you updated through this channel. So thanks again.